Greetings, it is I, Titus Narrative, your Lord and Emperor here in the Dracovin Empire, and welcome once more. If you are joining me, of course, in one of the two places that you would, live on Twitch or later on YouTube, hello to each of you. Here's my question for the day. Whether you're live or joining me later, have you either played with or around Mockery Breeds? Because that's our topic for today, Mockery Breeds. So I'd like to give these questions of the day related to our big topic. But yes, we're diving back into the world of darkness, to a more interesting topic. Because, well, the corruption of the worm runs deep, and those that serve the worm, well, experiment is a big part of it. That's where the Mockery Breeds come in, which are exactly what they sound like. Mockeries of the fare that we know we've been talking about on the show over time. So, why don't we dive into it and we can give all the other shoutouts and stuff at the end of the video recording. For now, let's dive. And as I like to say, I like to tell you my sources. Now, usually I use the Werewolf Wikipedia as a kind of generalized outline for what I'm talking about, but then I go and dive into a number of books. Usually these books at least. Give you a little bit more information for myself, and also if I want to, if you want to dive deeper, I would also recommend checking them out. The second edition Book of the Worm is a great place to start out with. I would definitely recommend, because this is the one I used a lot more, is the W20 Book of the Worm. This is the book that I will be using exclusively with the Wikipedia page to talk about all the stuff today. So, these two books here give you an idea of the Mockery Breeds, give you the information, but the mechanics side is definitely in this book here, the Book of the Worm for W20. So I recommend if you want to mechanically use them, that's the one you look at. And we'll throw this one up here, which is an image from Book of the Worm. It is one of the Mockery Breeds. It is unfortunately the only image of a Mockery Breed that I could find in that book, or pretty much any. So we'll just stick with this one. We'll take a look at the Yeren here, which we'll talk about at the end, because it's the alphabetically last one, as we get into the rest of the video. So, just got the one image today. What are Mockery Breeds, though? That's a good question to start out with, because they are a product of Pentex. Pentex being the major super corporation akin to your Microsofts or Amazons, except in the world of White Wolf and World of Darkness, they are horribly corrupted by the worm and have worm spirits and corruption deep ingrained into them. It's a complex topic, Pentex, that maybe its own video really should do about its existence and stuff, but for now, just understand it exists. They're relatively horrible, and they do a lot of very worm-based things. So, that's the kind of idea. And they had a project named Project Lycon, which created it basically... They wanted to create their own worm-based changing breeds. That was the point of it. That's what a Mockery Breed is. It's basically a changing breed created for the worm. So they're not creations of Gaia, and because they aren't, they have drawbacks. Limited breeding stock. They're only able to reproduce with one of their breed aspects, either Homid or a corresponding animal. They're unable to assume the opposite breed form. So if you were born Homid to one of them, you could not become the animal. If you're born the animal, you could not become the Homid all the way. You'd only be able to go to the middle. There could be Metis versions of Mockeries born, but other than that, again, it's an incomplete part of it. They're not part of the spirit world, meaning that they're usually barred from learning gifts. Usually. Talk about that. And even Banes, basically worm spirits, basically consider them artificial spirits and just are like, nah, I don't want anything to do with them. Though they can learn Fomori like House. We haven't talked about Fomori. It is a topic that we'll handle. We won't get too deep into it, but it's another type of worm creature. So, again, they have this taint of the worm that's on them that, yeah, if you are a general shapeshifter from Gaia, you will recognize this thing as, well, Fomori. And that's the thing, is they aren't technically Fomori, which again, we'll talk about in another video another day, but they gain Fomori-like powers and recognize that. So, where did this come about? Well, it all began with the Neurodynamic Laboratories, which was a Pentex-owned laboratory under Project Iliad. It stole research from the developable Neogenics Amalgam, which was a company deciphering and correcting shape-changer genes. Their goal was the NDL, Neurodynamic Laboratories, goal to create basically a Phara changing breed loyal to Pentex. The fact is, when it comes to dealing with Garou, Pentex had been heavily reliant, and still is heavily reliant, on Black Spiral Dancers, the corrupted werewolves, because they are the main force that can actually fight against the Garou very easily. Fight fire with fire, so to say. So this was an idea that we can get out from under their, claws. None of these creations that they managed to come up with had the ability to access more than 2 or 3 forms. And it was enough to receive funding to begin their own project with the re-election of the board of directors, and now Frederick Appleton leads Project Lycon, with creations becoming more and more successful. We have a list of 5 creations, known mockeries, but it doesn't mean that they're not, working on more of them, because that's a fact that they are doing. They are developing more of these mockeries, even now, kind of storyline-wise. I mean, it's a possibility that in W5, once we get that out, we might see mockeries revisited in a way, or things. I'm unsure where it might actually be 5th edition Werewolf. I'm not sure now, because Vampire's technically 5th edition. It's a confusing statement. It wasn't for Hunter. H5 is just normal Hunter. It's a 3rd edition. But regardless, though, the fact is, none of the projects are really fully successful. I think that's the way to best look at it, is each of these Mockery Breeds has been reached goals, and none have been abject failures, but they haven't reached full success. And they have managed to keep a lot of their fact that they're doing this away from their Black Spiral allies. So, there have been a lot of deals, backroom stuff. It's like the science side versus the corporate side have been continuing on this, and even the corporate side continues to support the project. Let's, though, talk about what these are, what these creatures are, in each of them a little bit individually. Because, as I said, there are 5 of them. So the first one they developed was the Werewolves. They're basically created to be a solution to Garou, and even possibly fight against Black Spirals if they can turn against them. Because again, beings of the worm aren't always loyal to each other. So it was the first one to be designed. It used genetic material from a Garou, of course, from a werewolf, some stolen DNA research. So they basically created perfect, as they called it, perfect custom-built killing machines. Their point was to get close to Garou targets, strike them with surprise and overwhelming force. They do not have high intelligence, though. They're about as clever as a starving dog. They are immune to delirium. They don't have spiritual counterparts like a true werewolf will have. They don't have gnosis. They don't have gifts. But they show the same reaction to silver a basic werewolf would. They can eat any meat, but the flesh of kinfolk and Garou grant them a satiation. That's an important part about this. The flesh of kinfolk and Garou is what satiates them. So, I can eat anything I want, but they're always in this kind of starving kind of situation. And because of this, and because generally speaking, they do still have allies with Black Spirals that keep the Black Spirals away from them. Accidents happen, but they'd rather not. So they were created from captured dogs and wolves. And so far as these artificial Mockery Breed comes, none of them have mated, and they haven't reproduced. Their shapeshifting is mildly mystical in nature. They really can only be lupus or Krynos form. So. Yeah. They're pleasant creatures, unfortunately. And it's the sheer fact that if you would ever see one, they're drooling wolves with ragged pelts. In Krynos form, they're kind of almost look a little mangy and savage. They smell rank and ill. And if you can sense the worm, they just emanate it spiritually. The other thing is, though, and this is the important thing, they do smell close enough to wolves that they could get close to if you're not noticing anything. And that's the danger to werewolves of them. They do still smell like wolves, generally speaking, which is their actual smell. Yep. So, yeah. These creatures, when unleashed, are usually unleashed in packs. And because of their nature of their hunger, when they are encountered, they are starving. And of all of Pentax's Mockery Breeds, this is the most insulting to Gary. Gnawing bones, hunting kin, and they are made from creatures, wolves and dogs and such, so they're related in a way. And so it's just a monster. Moving on, though, there are 4 more breeds we're going to talk about. Anurana. So, this is supposed to be a naval support form. They can no longer be created, but a bunch of the population escaped into the wilderness. That's an important note. So they're basically, unlike the other ones, which are like were-dogs, kind of, these are more were-frogs. They're an early creation of Pentax and the Mockery Breed and Project Lycon. They have been overall deemed to be a failure in the long term. Again, though it wasn't an abject failure. None of these are an abject failure. It just didn't get to the point where it needed to be. And so now, they're wild. The idea might have been that there had been some issues with the Rokia dealing with their naval and maritime kind of issues with Pentax, so maybe creating these things were a basis of fighting against that. There really isn't an idea if that's true or not. Also, into sewers for bone gnawers, patrolling polluted rivers, lakes, and estuaries around the facilities. There's a lot of reasons that possibly could have resulted in someone thinking, we're going to make a frog monster. But they did. And there also is suspected there's some personnel from a Freak Feet former project that was moved from Project Iliad to Project Lycon, and they've been making something similar. They wanted to try it again, but with the new technique. But it's a screw-up. So, the result of mixturing repurposed NDL technologies, once again, and based on those created during the Werewolf's technology, and improved techniques from the Freak Fleet project. Freak Feet. They wanted to create a breed of true shapeshifters under Pentax control, and codename Anurana was the project. It did have some success. They created something. It was uncontrollable. Hypnotic, mystical, Bane implanting conditioning, all of these things failed utterly. And the first generation of test subjects that they created sent out on scouting mission to basically investigate Rokia activity never returned. So they survived, though, and are now wild. They do have strange lingering connections to Pendex. They stalk facilities and personnel to this day. They dwell and breed in pollution-rich waters near Worm Corporation's facilities. They are not allies of the Garu, however. They're kind of horrible things. They're designed to thrive in polluted worlds of an apocalyptic world. So they do attempt to murder anything and attack anything that's attempting to clean and cleanse the place that they call home. They do have some kind of understanding with balefire sharks who patrol those waters, so the two of them can get along? They vary like a lot of shapeshifters, but they are very oftentimes low intelligence, low appearance. They have two breeds, Homid and Metis. They can't reproduce with any kind of earthly amphibian. They've got some stats, which we're not going to get into. They have three forms, a Homid, a Nurin, which is kind of like a Glabro, and Dagon, which is kind of a Krynos form, which they have stats for. They can step sideways by submerging polluted waters and emerging from the same. They regenerate the same rate as Garu. They do not suffer vulnerability to silver or any other substance, and they are immune to delirium. They aren't part of any pack with the spirit world, and no spirit will consent to teach them gifts. And even Banes look down. But they do have a number of innate Formor-like powers in Dagon form. Eyes of the Worm, Frog Tongue, Maw of the Worm, and Nimbleness. So they aren't completely without ability, and they are an interesting creature, but they aren't quite there. I think that's to kind of say what to talk about them. They aren't quite there. So, if you would see one, though, in Homid form, they're kind of just a little off. Subtle mouth rotations, wide eyes, broad, thin-lipped mouths, huge, tiny or very huge ears, elongated fingers are very common. When they're in their more werefrog form, bodily and facial hair vanish, hair on their head becomes slick and patchy, limbs elongate with bulgy, rubbery muscles, fingers and toes gain webbing, skin takes a grayish or greenish cast, eyes bulb, lips vanish, and skin gets a sheen. And that's in their Anuran form, their middle form. In Dagon form, it's absurd and terrifying. They're hunchbacked frogmen with staring eyes, huge mouth, long dangled arms and legs. A little bit of fish presents in that form almost, too. A little less frog and more fish. And their limbs terminate in wicked webbed talons. Mouth are crowded with tiny needle teeth. So theoretically, they're only in America's East Coast. Their reproduction makes it slow for them to spread. So they don't really head away from polluted nests very often. So they don't have any kinfolk, but they are capable of producing, reproducing with any Homid, basically. Most end up with a horrible, hideous miscarriage, a swirling stew of genes and polluted magic that don't come together to a viable fetus of any kind, or a lot of more horrible things. But if it manages to survive, it's in one of their own kind. And that's with Homids. Or when they've reproduced with a Homid, whether they're male or female, I should say. The Metis are worse. It's much less likely to fail in utero, but they're often sterile, even more deformed, even more monstrous. And even rather than infant, they're born as like a cat-sized tadpole with humanish face. They reach maturity in 5 years, and they are able to abandon their immature form for the favor of shape-shifting into the other 3 forms in about 3 years. They have about a life expectancy of 2 decades. Pendex Point employees are a big thing to kidnap for the breeding stock. So, I mean, that's good and bad. Take that, Pentex. But still, it's like, it's a horrible place to go to with frog people kidnapping you. It's very Lovecraftian. So, just keep that in mind. It's pretty awful. You know? And they do harass Pentex. As much as they are creatures of pollution and enjoy it and live for it, they still hate their former masters in a way. So they're kind of a little outside of that war for time. But that's the Anurana. Next up is the Samsa. I've used a Samsa in a game. I had an entire storyline of Samsa in my Legacy King game that was quite interesting and based upon information there. So, the Samsa are cockroach shifters. They are deemed a failure by Pentex, and the remaining ones are mostly contained in their labs, though there are some escapees. What's interesting about the Samsa, they are one of the few Mockery Breeds, pretty much maybe the only Mockery breed, that has taken interest in a spirit. Cockroach himself. Cockroach seeks to survive the apocalypse. Whether the worm is victorious or not. So he's been kind of tempting the Samsa away and basically, tries to kind of make them his own, as long as they're useful. So he's kind of like gotten away a little bit to the dying cause. He does allow his brood to consort with them, and he forbids his tribe to harm them. So, this is an interesting place for me. The original creation of Samsa was, again, with Project Metamorphosis. They wanted to create a corporate espionage tool. A swarm-based shapeshifter that could infiltrate anywhere, and then pass information back to a shared link to every member of the swarm. They basically stole, the NDL's product marketing personnel stole the idea of an assassin concealed in 100 different places in the room, waiting for the target to arrive before reforming into a single killing form. The scientists could not meet the goals. They created a human-insect hybrid, but it cannot separate into a swarm. Instead, the Samsa are a mind-shattering 8-foot-tall bipedal cockroach that are terrified of the dark. Product Metamorphosis was an abject failure. Several dozen prototypes, gibbering in fear, were left in their cells. High stamina, low appearance are very big in their stats or their traits. All of them have a paranoia derangement and also a second derangement. They have 2 forms, Hamid and Ugenzifer. Hamid is basically a disheveled, confused appearance, fevered madness in their eyes, but they're pretty much people. The Ufgezverner is a 8-foot-tall bipedal cockroach with greenish-brown armored carapace and thick mandibles. Yes, it does inflict delirium on vulnerable witnesses. And it gets to choose 2 traits when it manifests. The majority are Fomori powers, except as noted, antenna and swarm are unique to the Samsa. The swarm is an interesting one, as cockroaches keep falling from its carapace and they obey its commands. So it's got a little bit of that swarm ability, but not really that well. Yeah. They are incapable of stepping sideways, but they can hear nearby spirits whenever they enter deep shadow or darkness, which feed on their paranoia and dread. They're only immune to delirium in their Ufgensifer forms, and in Hamid they're as vulnerable as humans. They heal at the same rate as Garu. They're not vulnerable to silver, but suffer aggravated damage from insecticides in their bug form. and they never suffer damage from radiation or toxic waste. They are as difficult to eradicate as natural cockroaches. When a Samsa takes lethal or aggravated damage as their last health box, they automatically spend 1 permanent willpower and dissolve in thousands of cockroaches scrambling in all directions. All but one of these die within an hour. The final one, with only 1 level of health and ravenously hungry, each day consuming twice its body weight, growing in size or getting another health level. And when it gets 7 health levels, it's now a giant cockroach that shapeshifts in the hominid form. It has no memory of several hours from before its death, and can only roll snippets of the cockroach experience as a terrifying nightmare. And each use of this ability is another permanent derangement on it. Now, it can learn gifts. Cockroach Spirit's nice enough to teach them gifts, as long as they're willing to listen. Glasswalkers have learned of this tutelage and are confused and saddened. They're kind of exacerbated that it won't discuss the entire situation with their tribe. So, the Glasswalkers are aware of these things being tutored by Cockroach. Yeah. They're pleasant. Now, they do have an ability to cause some of their own fears and mental illness on other victims nearby, to kind of gain a brief respite in return. So that's another important thing to talk about. So they can do that, kind of share their derangements, and it is a ability you might have to face if you are fighting against one of them. Granted, it might also just be trying to run away in fear, because honestly, it's really scared of you. When they're in their hominid form, they're haunted, jittery, fearful, sensitive to bright light, fear the darkness. They're suffering creatures. And in their roach form, it is important to also note that they make hissing, clicking noise that can't be understood by humans. But a Samsa can understand and speak these sounds in either form. So, when they are in big cockroach form, it's not that they couldn't speak. They make noises that, it's hard to understand. Nowadays, if Pendex uses them, the ones that are still captured, it's for psychological warfare, distractions. Drop it into an area, wait for chaos to erupt, clean up teams to recapture it after the mission. So yeah. Because they explode into roaches when trying to be recaptured, their this last dish survival method was really not originally understood by Pentex and was just discovered by them. So they've managed to escape because of this. So the exploding roaches is a new thing. When they escape, they're technically worse off most of the time. You're no longer being kept in a nice little place that's keeping you safe. There's a big world around you, and you're already insane and afraid. There's no known times that where cockroaches have bred yet, so it is assumed that their genes are true, and they would have a Samsa child, if they would. But everything is just broken. Other than encountering one during Pentex stuff, a Glasswalker could be enlisted by Cockroach to basically help Samsa out. He had basically helped the first one escape, has instructed others to follow, and is basically trying to get the weird cockroaches free. And maybe a little bit of psychological help, because they really need it. The poor dudes. They really need it. So, the Kerasi are were-rhinos that the Pentex created as shock troopers in Africa, and to create mayhem and conflict between the Adani and the Endless Storm. It's an African. They're the youngest of the Mockery Breeds. They are been active for a short period after the fall of Blacktooth. Blacktooth was a ruler in Africa, and his pride, Endless Storm, kind of controlled it. He was a Black Simba that controls a lot of Africa. It's getting into storylines of other stuff. I've talked a little bit about it before, but I don't dive into specific characters right now. It's not in the future. They wanted to improve. They focused on improving the design. They wanted to create the first stable Mockery breed with them. Much to the displeasure of the other Mockeries they created. They created herds of Kerasi to wreak havoc in the wilderness. Most of them involved attacking human communities, as well as raids on the holds of African Pharaoh, and which were secured by the first teams. They've begun to breed with supervision, experience, and independence that never had So they've begun to breed without supervision and experience that of independence they never had in laboratories. So they also have been starting to wonder why they take orders from Pentex. These thoughts turn slowly. So one day they perhaps will rebel from the corporate masters and choose their own destiny, but they haven't yet. They heal like Garu, don't have vulnerability to silver. They have a minimum connection to the Umbra, which does actually aid them in concealing their worm origins. Since they only have animal counterparts, many higher brain activities are new for them. So the average one is short-tempered and brutish, but with a little bit of animalistic cunning. They do retain a lot of information, more than they would let other people know. So they only have two breeds, Metis and Frau, rhinoceros form. Kerasi are fertile in both white and black rhinoceros, linking the two species in an unnatural way. Their parents will also result in pregnancies more often, which also can put the rhino population in jeopardy. They are affecting rhino population. They have three forms. The Bandii is basically Glabrow, vaguely humanoid, bulky, oversized head, bluff, right gray skin that hides their muscles, tiny, large, bumpy nose with a kind of proto-horn. That it does also give delirium. The Kiforu, which is Krynos, basically. Bipedal monstrosity, thick hides, basically a giant rhinoceros head. Two massive snout horns, the color of dried blood, four clawed fingers, delirium, and then the rhino form, the Farao. They can be distinguished by normal rhinos by crimson tint in their horns. They cannot learn gifts or step sideways, but they do have former-like abilities and sense the energies of Worm and Gaia, as well as occurrences of other supernatural creatures. So they can kind of detect other supernatural creatures. So this success is only second to the last one we're going to talk about, the Yeren, which has also been, pictured here the entire time. So they are fairly successful, but they are mystically weak in comparison to a lot of the other breeds, which is an important thing now, to kind of talk about. Which is both good and bad. It's this mixed bag of being a little weak, mystically. Go undetected that your connection to the worm, but also you lose a lot of abilities. They leave devastation in their wake, and not really a lot of traces of worm involvement. So it is a dangerous thing that they are in a way, especially for Farah in Africa, because you might not know the worm is attacking you when these things go. Yep. They are short-tempered, and you're unlikely to encounter them outside of Africa. And again, they would be confusing because they don't smell like the worm. Now let's talk about the last one today. So we have one more, which we've been showing here the entire time. The Yeren. Were-apes. They were named after a legendary race of hominins in China. They've been basically designed to thrive in urban environments. They are the most successful of the Mockery Breeds by far. They're currently focused in the business world of North America, but can expand. They regenerate like Garu. They don't have the vulnerability of silver. And they are able to step sideways. Although they can only use artificial reflective surfaces like mirrored or chromed installations. They're basically created to counter glasswalkers and bone gnawers, the more urban side of Garu. But their capabilities are far beyond that, have proven it. Their natural attraction to power and to territorial nature makes them competitors with criminals, vampires, black spiral dancers, and similar groups for control of urban domains. They've managed to nestle themselves in upper-middle management of corporations, banks, and law firms, where they remain in sporadic contact with Pentex. A few have begun climbing the corporate ranks in Pentex-owned companies, and most of those few have their eyes on a seat in the board of directors. So, because they are so successful, because they are a thing that can easily be put in there, they are very corporate, very Pentex. They're very short-sighted, petty, rotten. Basically, they're the worst part of human nature. Their territoriality does keep them from working in very close groups very often. Though they do network. As long as they stick out of each other's territory, network together. So this is a little bit of a blessing for urban Garu. On the other hand, they're new. And being seen as a threat is not something yet. You know, you might not know you're being targeted by a werite until, boom, it's there. They have only one breed, Haman. They cannot produce metis, and are entirely incapable of reproducing with other primates. They have no kinfolk. All that have been recruited are characterized as overwhelming greed and hunger for power. Anyone the noble go has not been changed into a werewolf. They reproduce by a similar ritual to the Korax, which is basically passing the shadow of the egg. During a ritual spanning 4 days, the Yeren and the neophyte wheel from party to party, abusing anyone or anything in this vicinity. As the rite progresses, both stumble in and out of the Umbra, where the new pledge steadily fuses his flesh and nature and spirit together, and which the rite culminates in the first change of Bloody Rampage. 2 forms, Hamid and Krynos. Hamid is a usually well-groomed person, mild psychosis, kind of. In Yeren form, the Krynos form, the war form, is basically man and it combined. And the species depends on the personality of the Yeren. There's blends of orangutan, mandrill, mountain gorilla, chimpanzees, and several uncategorized species. And they do inflict full delirium. So in contrast to other mockeries, they are part of a provisional they're a provisional part of the pact with wormish spirits and black spiral dancers. So they enjoy the patronage of Rel Shab, servant of the urge worm of greed, and they can learn gifts and have begun to develop their own repertoire. None have advanced past rank 3 yet. They gain renown by acquiring power, status symbols, influence, but do so very slowly. And those spirits that do sponsor them are still a little wary of these unnatural creatures. So that's an important part to mention about them. So power, money, respect. They are corporate greed in its worst turned monster. So that's an interesting idea for this very successful mockery breed. So, and again, corporate America is where they're starting. Doesn't mean they might not spread to the rest. And of course, if you encounter one, it's because, well, probably you're in their territory and they're trying to gain control of it. Or various other reasons. And a good thing about them, well, a good thing in a way for them in their situation, is they largely support Pentex, because Pentex supports them. But they aren't, again, satisfied with being pawns or whatever, manipulated. So there isn't really a stable relationship between master and servant where they're concerned. They have ambition. So, if Pentex doesn't appreciate them, doesn't mean they might go somewhere else. And, again, it's this weird thing of you don't know where they're going to end up with that. And certainly, within Pentex, it's their strongest point. But, those are the Mockery Breeds. So as I said here, they're interesting creatures, and you can see there has been a bit of success here and there in the creation of Mockery Breeds. Pentex is developing their own shape-changers. And other than our friends the Werewolves there that I talked about, there really hasn't been a true success. There have been steps in it. Some have escaped. They're creating new creatures, new monsters out there that oftentimes are very inhuman and dangerous and deadly. And it's the evils of Pentex. I guess it's the best way to say it. Pentex and everything they do, I'll have to have a video on it for sure. But this is just a culmination of some of the worst aspects of the company and their degradation of things that are both human and natural for their betterment. This is all of it's to basically be like, well, I don't want to deal with those black spiral dancers anymore. That's really why they've created such horrible things. And yeah, there are creatures that you could pity. Certainly the Samsa are the most pitiable. Our good friends the werefrogs, a little bit to a degree. And yeah, things like the were-rhinos, were-apes, they're not great. The werewolves are just animals. The Mockery Breeds are an interesting protagonist most of the time. Doesn't mean you couldn't play some of them. It'd be difficult. And certainly, where would you game with it? Their use and introduction makes for more interesting things. There's more threats out there than just a black spiral or a man in a corporate suit. That man in a corporate suit could become a giant ape monster and punch you in the face back. But oftentimes, not only will they punch you in the face, they would have set trap for you. All that scheming. Where will Pentex lead next? Oh, I don't know. Well, to see if the W5 develops anything. 5th edition of Werewolf. Don't know. We may or may not revisit them again. We'll just have to wait and see when it comes out. Other than that, enjoy the ones that have been introduced now, or easily come up with your own, because who knows if there was another minor experiment. Similar results with monsters in Pentex's laboratories. Anyway, that'll be it for today. I'm going to get going. I have some things to do today. Thank you for joining me for this. If you are joining me live on Twitch, thank you. Hey, glad for you to hear. Just give a follow is a great way to support. I just kind of ask that for most people that are checking stuff out and enjoying what they're doing. Joining me on YouTube and enjoying the videos there. Subscription there would be great. Leaving a comment. My question earlier, have you ever dealt or played or done anything around Mockery Breeds? A like to the video, ring the bell if you're already a subscriber just to get reminders, all those kind of great things to get support for the channel. I have social media, Discord, Twitter.com. There's where just schedule, find out what's going on with me, all those things. If you want to see tabletop stuff, Saturday mornings around 11 is when I have the normal World of Darkness stuff, and Tuesdays and Thursdays I do in the early afternoons other tabletop related stuff. Thursdays usually Pathfinder. I do live shows. I have discussing tabletop Saturday in the afternoon, in the evening I should say, where we talk about tabletop stuff, and I do some gaming stuff on Mondays and Fridays. That all the tabletop related videos go up on YouTube a couple days later, usually 2 to 3 days depending on what's going on, if there's issues with videos and stuff. Alright, that's all my shoutouts. thank all of you out there, and I bid all of you wonderful farewell until next time we delve into the world of darkness. Farewell.